Good morning, everybody. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avagnani.
bringing everybody this week's Ascendant World. I'm sort of tired. So this week it's we started talking last week about, when we start in I gotta wake up this morning. When we start working in collective levels, right? When we first start working in consciousness and energy and manipulating energy, so to speak, and creation and conscious creation.
Right.
Yeah. We talk about like how we believe it impedes on the free will of others, on
Right.
the will, all that kind of stuff.
Well, and if you think about it, that creation sets in motion a whole playlist of activities, a whole myriad of serendipities that need to happen and coincidences and things that have to align to allow something to be created.
Yep.
So there is that exertion of the individual creation on the collective.
Yeah. Or so we believe.
Right.
Because this is where we started going down this rabbit hole last week, right? We started talking about, but it's all us, right? The collective is all us anyway.
We are the collective.
Yeah.
As much as we are the individual.
Yeah. Good morning, Yasmin. Yeah. And when we start working in conscious energy, we still are looking at it often from this perspective of individuality, right, and separation. Even though we're talking in unity and wholeness, it's very frictional because it doesn't really line up. Because we talk about things like, and I remember, and we were talking about this when you first start working in energy work, we'll always be very aware of free will, of others' free will, right? And always
ask permission
and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, and at some point guidance was, well, it's all you, right? And yes, ego. So as we've always talked about, as we understand it, the ego's creation, the creation of the ego was to explore separation identity. So we have all these concentric levels of ego, just as much as we have concentric levels of consciousness, to explore those different levels of individuality and separation. And that really is free will. Like, so people ask us, well, what's free will? And it's like, well, it's really the idea of individuality and separation. So it's not, well, and it's also, by the way, it's also just an illusion as well.
Right. Right. Can't forget that.
Yeah. And so what happens as we go along is we start, like, this whole ascended world, our whole efforts here all came from us realizing that when we were doing individual sessions, that it was effective. It was like basically a collective share anyway, because everybody that we spoke to within like a week, right, was all in the same theme of what we're talking about, which is collective, right?
Yep.
And so we started working in these, and we talked this, I talk about this when I post about it, or when we post about it. It's about collective stream of consciousness and energy share. And that's what we're doing, is tapping into what is going on in the collective that is manifesting in our individual journeys, right? In our free will journeys, so to speak, right? Exploring all the different aspects of that separation, all the themes.
Right.
And guidance has been actually to go into that wholeness, to be that whole consciousness, and from there shift, because it's so much more effective at this collective level.
That instant manifestation. That's
that
instant creation, that instant results.
Right.
That, everybody's like, oh, that's what I want.
Yeah. Right. And even if they don't think that that's what they want.
Right.
Right. So this is how we got to this whole thing about responsibility, because we have felt collective bucking, right?
Right.
And 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 we've been dealing with some really big shifting, right, for the past year, this past 2 years, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's really intensified.
Right.
And so we started talking about that last week and going, well, are we impeding on the journey of others, right, by working so much in the consciousness and helping to shift at that level? Because we all do it in everything we do, in all conscious creation.
Right. And it's like dipping that toe that you are of the collective, that you believe you are of the collective, and seeing that ripple through the collective,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling limited by your awareness of the effect on the collective.
Right, because that turns into the responsibility thing, because then we start feeling this guilt, or we start feeling like, oh, is that because of what we've been doing?
Right.
And then, so there's these multiple levels of that, right? So there's the level of, first it's, oh, well, I'm impeding on somebody else's free will, right? That's that thought, right?
Right.
And then there's the brief thought of, well, who are you to direct that, right?
Right.
Versus it's all me. So of course it's me. Who am I? I'm the one who created it. So therefore, and I'm the one who changes it.
And then you take your relationships and the dynamics set up within those, and then apply that to what we're talking about here. And, if you're looking at your role as a parent, and your actions having an impact on your child, so you make sacrifices and you limit yourself to reduce that effect on your children or your family, or those close to you, when it's all perfect, and that responsibility, you've all created it together.
Well, because it's all one consciousness anyway, right?
And in balking and saying, no, I don't want that for them, you get into so many things like, I don't trust that they can handle it.
Yeah.
I don't trust it's for their best interest. And then you get into that level of control that your ego convinces you comes from a place of unconditional love.
Right.
And I know my father used to refer to it as tough love, but it really, I believe it to be just as simple as that is what unconditional love is. I love you so much that I will allow this for myself as the whole.
Well, and so when we start talking about that, there are a couple of things that are really important to keep in our forefront of consciousness, right? So one that comes to me is resolving and completing the idea of that there has to be a finite amount of anything for anybody, right? Because when we take responsibility for our creation, as well as just the creation that we're a part of, right? Then it's really important for us to be in that place of saying, well, so here's an example. I can win the lottery, and so can you, and so can everybody else, right?
Exactly.
Instead of saying, I have to and you can't, it's, what if we all did in different ways, right? In the way that serves us in the most expanded, way possible, And so, but we started looking at the word responsibility, which was interesting, right? Because we were talking about, doing our sixth course of the series in Wonderland program.
On self-responsibility.
All on self-responsibility, which we found that the participants are having a really challenging time getting to, right? And yet when we did that course, it was so freeing in so many ways.
Incredible.
Yeah. But when we say self-responsibility, think about the energy behind it. The energy behind it is very heavy, right? Take responsibility for your reality. Take responsibility. And what do we say that when we say that to a kid or anybody? It's like, well, take responsibility for your actions. It's got this burden of
such a negative connotation too.
It does. So when we looked up the definition, I have it up here because I was like, this is just a great guide, right? So the first one was the state effect of having a duty to deal with something or having control over someone. A true leader takes responsibility for their team and helps them achieve goals, right? So that's taking control over somebody. The second one was the state of or fact of being accountable or to blame for something. That's two.
Blame typically is what a lot of people, it jumps in the forefront.
Right. And then the third one was the opportunity or ability to act independently and make decisions without authorization. And that felt the best to us when we were talking about.
And aren't those in terms of the accepted definitions? So that was third.
Yes, third.
Have third.
Right. And so the reason we looked that up is because I said, maybe it's a matter that we hold expectations around the word responsibility that are always associated with burden and suffering and martyrdom and things like that, saying, oh, well, I will take the burden of responsibility for this, right? How many times have you heard that? I'll take the burden of responsibility for this, or
right.
That person takes the burden of responsibility, and burden and responsibility seem to go hand in hand, right? The way we define it. So we can say, I'm going to take self-responsibility, but if we believe that the word responsibility creates the idea of burden, then we're going to create that in our creations, which feels gross and icky.
Well, it's a natural deterrent.
Yeah.
Because you're like, the last thing I need is more responsibility. The last thing I need is more guilt and more burden. I'm here to lighten my load, not increase my load. Right.
And so it was funny because we heard ourselves, that was what started this, is we heard ourselves talking about that of, oh, but is that too much? Is that too much of a load to take on? And then I was like, wait a second, what are we saying? It's just because we think of taking self-responsibility for that creation makes it heavy, therefore we then avoid it, or we make it heavy. We make it a heavy.
We create the burden simply by accepting that definition of responsibility.
Right.
Well, and the third course, I think, is guidance and hidden messages. And in that course, we talk about how everything is a message. Nothing is not a message. So out of the blue, my dog started getting tics. And it's like, okay, there's got to be a message in that. And so just a few minutes ago, I looked that up, and it's tick symbolism is warning you that you have to tread carefully. Similar to the armadillo, the spirit animal insists that you make sure that you can stay detached in all situations. And above all, do not let anyone get under your skin. With the tick meaning, you may find that people close to you are deliberately trying to provoke a reaction. Stay clear and do not engage. Let them deal with their issues and keep yourself out of it. Tick symbolism notifies you that engaging will only instigate trauma, and distract you from your journey. So I felt that fits so perfectly with being distracted by the responsibility of our creations exerted on the collective,
or what we believe. What we believe is
exactly.
is a burden. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything's a message.
Right. Especially when it becomes a repetition. Right. Yeah. So it's and then it's for us to really, like, if we go to that core of changing the energy behind how we define responsibility, right? Then we can stop looking at it as, oh, a weight every time we look at it. Oh, well, when I take responsibility for that, oh, well, that's, instead of just saying,
when you're given a new position or like a promotion or whatever, you're given more responsibility, which then in turn corresponds or should correspond to more pay. And it's that perceived burden when actually it's like, okay, you have more power, so you have more gift. in
and that's that third definition, right?
exactly.
Yep.
So it really is working that way, the third definition, even though we bundle and distract with the other definitions of, oh, it's a burden. And am I up for that burden? When it's simply a change of that belief and definition of the word responsibility to really shift it into I acknowledge more the power.
Right. Well,
And
and what I'm laughing, I'm just like laughing while you're talking because I'm thinking, in a way, hasn't all of this experience of density and separation been an experience of burdening through responsibility? or actually pretending, it's almost like pretending that we have some lack, right? So that we could create the idea of responsibility instead of just knowing we're the creator, right, of our reality, which doesn't really bear responsibility. Responsibility is a word that we created in the ego, right? It's just, we created it. And there's no judgment on that creation. It just is, right? So it's not good or bad. It's perfect in its intention.
Right.
So when we do that, then it's sort of like this idea of, okay, so what if you said, instead of saying, well, this is my responsibility, you could say, okay, I created this. Now what does that create? What are the ifs that it creates? And see the fun in it. And yes, we still have so many layers. It goes back to that idea of good versus bad, the judgments that we have.
Right.
Course number 4 on forgiveness.
Yes.
The forgiveness cycle, which is all about judgment and releasing judgment, coming to resolution with all that. But when we get into that place of looking at things as created, and so yeah, it's unraveling this whole idea, right, that, oh, well, I have to be careful what I create because I can burden other people with it.
Right.
But then that's also still staying in separation and saying, that's not me, it's somebody else, and I'm not, whatever, to get to the place of saying, okay, if I'm guided, right? Course number 3, as you said, if I'm guided to create this, and, like if I get the pull to do it, and I check guidance, and guidance is absolutely, it is not for me to worry about its ripple effect in the collective.
Right.
And it's done from a place of love and wholeness, not limitation and exclusion. See, these are all the I want to say the conditions, but it's doing it more consciously, right? When we do it consciously, it's all inclusive. So and when we do it unconsciously, it's still all inclusive because we all agree on that experience as well. And so when we look at it from this bigger perspective, it's all about trusting. Course number 2.
For 2.
And so it's trusting that guidance is true to us, from that place of wholeness, and knowing that guidance sees the hologram of the whole picture of the collective, or whatever you want to call it. We just happen to call it the collective. There's so many different concentric levels of collective as well, right?
Right.
I mean, even the individual choices that we make, say here at this level of the body, is a collective consciousness of cells and organs and all this kind of stuff, right? In the quantum field that is created in the separations, if you want to get into mind-blowing stuff. but so we're always doing, everything we do is a collective decision.
Exactly.
In some way, shape, or form. It's just what we perceive it to be. And so it's like, okay, what the guidance had been about the whole free will thing was, this, going as long as you are connecting in at that level of wholeness, right? It will be played out. So if I stop looking at every person as an individual, instead of just looking at every piece of consciousness as a piece of my consciousness, right, in the hologram, and saying, okay, well, the Sarah facet of me will choose this way to play out this choice of creation as our whole, right? But as an individual within our whole, that is your free will.
Yes.
So when our, we want to call it the master controls, we want to call it God or whatever, but that's what we are, right? And then when we make that shift in creation, it's gonna ripple through all the individuals. And every individual that creates from that level will ripple out through all the other individuals. And so that's the whole way of shifting and getting to a place of a much more powerful place of creation, right?
Yes.
And we do it without the sense of having to think it's a burden to create, because we do, apparently, right?
Yes, I agree.
And it hides and cracks and crevices in so many ways. And then we feel guilty. Or when we say, oh, I'll take responsibility for that, we mean it as a burden of, oh,
Yes.
I need to be punished for doing that.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, in meditation, when I would take a look at this over the weekend, I would see it as a box that was just bigger than my arm's reach. So it was, it was really an effort to hold it, and just heavy enough to where it was almost too heavy for me to lift, but not too heavy for me to lift. So it was that constant stress and that constant exertion in carrying this burden around. And it was incredible, the detail about the box and carrying it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it until you actually let it go.
Right.
And that was incredible. And the relief I felt, unknowing that I was carrying all that.
Well, and a big part of that that comes to me is the forgiveness part, right?
Yes.
Because
yes.
if we hold a judgment of it, then we hold something to forgive.
And the ultimate gratitude.
Right.
For the whole set of circumstances, everything that brought me to the explosion that let me see the box. And the gratitude for all that participated in that, all the facets of myself and the box itself. And only then was I able to put the box down, let the box just essentially disintegrated.
Nice.
And it's like, it's so nice to not have to carry that box anymore.
Right. And it's not saying, fuck it to everything, excuse my French.
Right.
It's saying, if I choose that conscious commitment in everything, right, and in creation and guidance, if I do it from that place of, as we've been talking about, like all 7 aspects of the Wonderland program, right? If we do it from a place of worthiness and trust with guidance, forgiveness and gratitude, right? Self-responsibility in a way of owning it, free of thinking it's a burden, right? So if we shift that,
free of the burden.
Yeah. And then embracing the shadow,
aspects.
And then doing and knowing that you're doing it from self-love. If we commit to that with every creation, there's no burden.
Absolutely.
There's only freedom, and there's only like this. And then what'll happen is the synchronistic creation at the collective level will become even more powerful, because we'll all start really aligning ourselves in the same place individually as well as collectively. So that's the effort. That's really before we were really even conscious of what we were doing here with this extended world thing. That's really what the intention has been. And it was interesting just because you and I have seen it so reflected back to us in ripples through everything. And then it's like, oh, wait a second. Instead of we're tapping into what's going in at the collective level, it's, oh, are we creating what's going on at the collective level?
Right,
Right.
right. And in completing these 7 courses, we've gained momentum, and it's got its own inertia to
Yeah.
carry it forward.
Yeah.
And it's incredible.
It is. It
It's
is. And yes, of course, it's an agreement that we all made because we're all that one consciousness that's creating it. Right.
Yes.
So it's however we want to get to it. So Yasmin says, as we've been looking at the word responsibility for a while now, what came to me was responsibility, to consciously accept and embrace our ability to respond to our creation experience, which is what Sarah uses as like what she does is she calls it responsibility guide, right?
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I mean, if you look on our site, that's what it says under Sarah's name.
Right.
So, so it's a matter of, yeah, it's really this creation. And it's funny because the ego wants to say, oh, well, good, I'm not going to burden myself and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, but it's with these conditions that we're talking, right? To commit ourselves to that, because the more we commit ourselves to those 7 elements in that
Well,
wholeness,
and it's not even conditions, it's with those expansions.
right? Those expansions and the realizations, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yes.
Because when we do those things, when we start doing everything from those places, and that's why these 7 elements are so critically important in terms of our expansion and our progression, because it brings us back together into this motivation at a collective level, right? It aligns our individual motivations at a collective place. It just makes things really resolve so beautifully and efficiently and synchronistically.
And wholly.
Yeah.
So not leaving a few molecules behind to catch us later.
Yep. Yep. So that's our beautiful freeing thing for today, right? So I would say that our session part would be, yeah, allowing ourselves to, well, what if we just commit to that freedom of whole creation, right? Through those 7 elements, right?
Right.
In a way that's easy and fun and free and efficient and productive for everyone as well as the individual simultaneously.
That feels awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go do that, shall we? Everybody sit down, make yourself comfortable, relax, close your eyes, open your heart. As we step out of separation, back into wholeness and oneness, and we hold ourselves at the vibration where that is our truth. That is from where we exist, create, and experience. All right. That was interesting. It started out rocky, but then it got really crazy expansive, like dizzy almost.
Yes, dizzy, very floaty after all
Mhm.
the questioning went away.
Right. In the beginning, it was like, but.
What about and how and what will wait?
Yeah. And then finally there was just this shh. And then it was like, yeah, and the visualization I saw is like when you have like in a sailboat, right? And the wind is going, right? And so what you're working with in a sailboat is the wind pressure against the sails, right? Which is what we take on as responsibility, right? So that's what has helped us to what we consider navigate in separation, right? So then finally wasn't quite a sailboat, but it was something like that. But then it was just like, unclip the sails. And then that was the biggest panic, was like, no, 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 that's like crazy. And then I said it was just like all of a sudden it was just started to unclip and free itself, right? And then all the pressure, all the burden just went away. And then it was like you could see the whole ocean for what it was, instead of fighting against it or, managing it, so to speak. And then it was like, oh, and I can't even explain it better than that, but it just felt so easy and so complete and expansive and restful. I was like, oh, this is like, oh yeah.
Right. Do you remember those rides at like a carnival where you stand against the wall
Yeah.
and it spins?
Until the floor drops.
And I saw us in that, and then it turned into like a water drain, but like in the ocean, I don't even know what those are called, where it's like draining into something and it's
Like a
spiral.
whirlpool kind of
Like a
thing.
whirlpool. And we were in that, and it was like panic, but then it was like, oh, wait a minute, I can stick my hand out here, and oh, that's fun. And so everybody started doing that, and it started creating the drag on the whirlpool that made it just totally dissipate. And it was like, oh wow,
Oh yeah.
that was and then it just went, that floating
Mhm.
in the effortlessly in the water, and it was like, that feels incredible.
Yeah, that felt really good.
Awesome.
Very yummy. I can sit in that one for a while. Yeah, that felt good. I can't even tell. That's very deep. You can just feel that shifting, this almost like this, you can breathe deeper. Nice.
Right. Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone sit in that this week.
Right.
That's actually a really nice one. Very nice. It's time for us to unclip. And that's all I kept on seeing is like things getting unclipped that were like,
It created the resistance.
yeah, that creative resistance to manage through resistance, instead of just saying,
Yes. Yeah.
I can create through all of it. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Such a flow. All right. Well, everyone have a great week. Thank you for joining us. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg, Avagnoni.
signing off on this week's Ascended World. Have a good one.